Monster Patch. It's been 3,000 years. As I'm sure most people would agree with, the most recent major balance patch for Overwatch was not exactly successful in what it was aiming to do.
One of the lowest patches that we've had in a long time.
Have to focus on the balance patch. A little questionable.
It just kind of power crept the game a little bit, so as the intro stated, as the title stated, I'm bringing back an old project. This is the Monster Patch. It is how I would balance the game from its current standpoint, and yes, I hated the most recent patch as well as the hotfix so much that there's a lot of reversions in this, so get ready. The very first change I want to do so then armor isn't quite as polarizing as it is right now, given the fact that that 10 threshold nerfs a lot of characters a little too significantly in my opinion, as well as the fact that armor doesn't do as well into burst damage as it used to, which was one of its biggest strengths. Here's my solution. The minimum damage resistance from armor is going to be adjusted from 10 to 25%. Scaling down from 40%, starting at 15 damage and ending at 25 damage, which basically just means that all damage 15 or under is going to be reduced by 40%, scaling linearly from 15 to 25 damage will be dropped to 25%. For example, at 10 damage, it'll be somewhere in the middle. It's like 32.5, I think, is the exact middle of that. So any source of damage at 20 will be reduced by 32.5%. That way then armor finally has its effectiveness on burst damage back, such as Pharah, which has been a key talking point lately, while still having a bit of an extra effect on lower damage thresholds. For example, Tracer in previous patches was extremely annoying for tanks just because she could flank behind and start doing significant chip damage to you. Now, it's still reduced chip damage like it is with the current version of armor, but it's not overwhelmingly reduced like it is now, as well as the fact that, again, the effectiveness on burst damage, Pharah rockets going from 120 to 90, is significant. The first actual hero I would like to address is D.Va, and this is a bit of a preview for my D.Va rework project I'm working on. Basically, I just think that she fits a poke style a little bit better than a dive style, but I still want her to have a proactive playstyle so she's not just sit in the back and farm damage. So my way to solve this problem is as follows. First things first, I'm going to reduce her spread angle from a 3.375, whatever the hell it means, to 1.5, which puts it a little bit wider spread than Mauga's individual chain gun fire, and a little bit narrower spread than, for example, Doomfist primary fire. You can think of it a little bit more similarly to Orisa at her maximum spread, which you don't get to see very often because of the overheat mechanic, but that's beside the point. The next change is to reduce her number of pellets in her primary fire from 11 to 7, while increasing the damage from 2 to 0.6 to 2.5 to 1, counting for damage fall off. The goal of this change is simple. It makes her deal less damage if you're inaccurate, more damage at a decent range if you're more accurate. Most of the pellets nowadays, unless you are in your enemy's face, are not going to be connecting that much. So this change will make it so that then she is dealing a bit more damage if you have good aim. Additionally, just to make it a little bit easier to chase people down, the move speed penalty on primary fire will be reduced from 30 to 20%. This will just make it a little bit easier to chase people down and a little bit less frustrating to play D.Va. Now, this is a change that was talked about a long time back in like 2018, 2019, so I'm not so sure about it nowadays, especially because D.Va currently is already strong, but I do have enough nerfs to, I think, satiate. Defense Matrix now reduces beam type damage by 20%. That way then, yes, beams still do go through Defense Matrix, but she's at least reducing their damage. She's at least reducing how much she's taking from them. She has some form of counterplay outside of just running away. And not only that, but she can still protect her teammates a little bit from beam type damage. It's not a lot, but it will help a little bit. However, these are some pretty significant buffs overall, especially the beam type damage one. So the nerfs do have to be quite hard to compensate. But this is going to kind of follow a theme I want for this video. I want to overall nerf tanks just introduce more counterplay into their weaknesses, as well as give them a little bit more fairness at playing against them. So the first nerf for D.Va is to reduce her defense matrix's maximum duration from 3.5 seconds to 2.5 seconds. Yes, this is already lower than it was last patch, but I mean, these are some very significant buffs. I think that she will need a bit of a nerf here. If anything, you could reduce it to 3 seconds instead, and I think that would be fair. Critically though, the current recharge rate would be maintained, so she gets defense matrix per second as fast as she does now, meaning it'll be less time to fully refill defense matrix. Additionally, the cooldown on her boosters will be increased by half a second from 3.5 to 4 seconds. This is mostly just because boosters are already an extremely impactful cooldown, and she can kind of use 2 in 1 if you are able to engage and disengage at once, which a lot of good D.Va players are, so the cooldown nerf isn't a massive deal, it's just more of a window to play around her. Finally, just to make sure she's not spamming around from medium range too much, I'm going to reduce her fall off from 10 to 20 meters to 10 to 15 meters. Her range damage is already going to be better despite this nerf, but I don't want it to be so much better to where she's just rewarded for sitting back and poking. I still want engaging to be viable. That is why I want her damage to be relatively similar, just require more tracking, just to have the ability to poke more. And that is what the move speed penalty reduction is also doing. In the worst case scenario, this does reward D.Va a little bit too much for sitting back and just poking without engaging. I think in a best case scenario, this rewards skill a little bit more, as well as providing a more proactive D.Va play style, thanks to the movement speed and the damage remaining relatively the same. The next hero, I might have overcooked a little bit on this one, but this is still where I think the character could be benefited. Specifically, Doomfist's power block now prevents any stuns or crowd controls from the front. So if you're blocking, Hinder will not hinder you. Spear will push you, but not stun you. And that's the common theme with this. You are immune to stuns, you are immune to Hinder, anything that would prevent you from using a cooldown or moving, but you're not immune to knockback. That is the critical one that is maintained. Not only that, but this would probably also block hack from the front as well. If you're still playing well against a bad Doomfist, you can just flank behind him, hack him there, throw a Hinder nade above him, he's got to block that. There's counterplay to the counterplay, you just have to outplay the opponent. However, as a Doomfist player, this will allow you to at least have a chance against a lot of these crowd controls. And more of a quality of life thing, Rocket Punch, while active, not while charging, is now immune to stuns and hinders as well. You can still hack it, but it won't stop his momentum. If you throw a Hinder nade at him, he will not receive the Hinder effect, but he will still take damage. Same thing with the spears, except you're also still immune to knockback, as Rocket Punch currently is. This is a quite big quality of life buff. Might actually move the needle a little bit on how good Doomfist is. But as a trade-off, his overhealth is going down. Specifically, ability overhealth from 40 to 30, 5 lower than it was last patch. And the overhealth from his ult dropped from 75 to 60. The extremes of dumping on people when you're feeling hot and being dumped on when they decide to counterpick you should be equalized a little bit with these changes. Maybe another buff here or there, maybe another nerf here or there. I'm not sure how broken this would make Doom, but I don't think it's a significant move this way or the other. Queen is actually extremely simple because I don't have to do anything. I think she's okay. I think last patch she would have been fine, but this, at the very least, Queen sets a precedent for where I think the balance can be for tanks. She's not mega overpower prepped, like somebody like Mauga or D.Va or Zarya, at least before the hotfix.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
But she's not super bad, and she's still a little bit underwhelming compared to the other tanks, but I'm trying to nerf them overall so that then they're closer to level of Junker Queen. If you need to nerf her at all, I think bringing back that bleed heal ratio down to 2.25 times, or just straight back to 2 times, is totally valid. But overall, I think Queen is kind of fine. Oh, Mauga.
Miss me, assholes? You fuck! Huh.
I'm not gonna pretend I'm the messiah who knows how to balance this character. I'm just not. Nobody is. Nobody knows how to balance this guy. But I'll throw my hat into the ring with my suggestions. First things first, similar to what content creators have said, I believe Spylo has said this, Malga now gains a burst of 40 overhealth whenever he ignites any enemy. If you reignite the same enemy after they've gone out, this will reapply, and if you ignite all 5 players on the enemy team, that'll be effectively 200 overhealth you're getting. Except it's reduced to 20 if you ignite the tank. This should decentivize shooting the tank just a little bit. Not only that, but now Overrun cleanses debuffs, specifically the activation. If you are currently running, you are not immune to any debuffs, but if you start Overrun when you're antied, when you're hacked, when you're virused, when you have a damage over time, whatever it may be, it will cleanse that effect upon starting to run. You have to start the run in order to cleanse it. This already is a gargantuan buff, so I do think he might need some more significant nerfs than what I've provided him. But we're not there yet. First things first, Cardiac now gives Malga 100 overhealth as it did that previous patch, but it disappears after Cardiac runs out. So that 3-second duration is all you have to get value out of that 100 overhealth, and if it's all gone by the end, great, you got maximum value. If it's not all gone, then you need to rethink how you're using Cardiac Overdrive. Next, I want to drop the move speed penalty on firing a chain gun from 15% to 8% just to make him feel a little bit more fluid, and increase the overhealth you gain from a direct stomp from 75 to 85. However, I think that Malga's stomp has been doing a little bit too much damage. Specifically, if you hit the direct, it does 150 on a direct stomp. So I want to reduce that down to 125. Yes, this technically is a change to the crit multiplier, but I think a direct damage nerf to the direct stomp is necessary because, just changing the outer radius, I don't really think is a huge deal. Another way you can go about this is simply reducing crit multiplier to 50% instead of 100%. This will drop the damage, given the buff I gave, from the current state of 150 to 127.5. Still close enough to the 125 that I'm looking for without, mattering all too much about how far it is away. In general, I just think 150 is too big of a number. If you've ever played Malga, got a nano boost, and stomped directly onto somebody's head, you know how much that fucking hurts. Next, I want to reduce his overall passive conversion rate from 50 to 30%. That way then he's, again, less incentivized to shoot the tank and more incentivized to keep the fire rolling on as many targets as possible, as well as reducing the effect of cardiac healing all the way down from 100% back to 60%, back to where it was, without reverting the change to halved effect on teammates. The 40% damage reduction is still fine. It allows Malga to stay in the front line and stay firing when he's alive and when he's allowed to, but the moment things get hairy, he's going to have to run out of there, and he can't just shoot the tank to mitigate any problem he has. And finally, to make it so that he's not super reliant on shooting the tank, and in fact, he's disincentivized from it, firing both chain guns reduces the firing rate by 20% now. Still the widespread, same fire rate on a single chain gun, but if you're firing both, you're going to be doing slightly less damage per second than you currently are. Still worth it on tanks, just not as worth it as it used to be. Overall, I think that Malga is a problem character I don't have the solution to. I don't have a way to make this character balanced and fair. Rather, I just have a way to make this character a little bit better in my eyes, at the very least. This next character, I might have cooked a little bit too much on this one, but hear me out. A lot of these ideas, again, come straight from Spylo, basically. Nothing super original here, but I think that it's funny at the very least. First things first, this is going to sound crazy as I go through the buffs, but Fortify now provides a 15% speed boost rather than a 20% speed reduction. That way then, when you pop Fortify, you're more incentivized to go in with it, rather than sit back and poke. Next, Javelin Spin provides a 5-meter dash in any direction, similar in distance to Tracer Blink if you need a comparison, but it can go upwards, for example. So you can use it to try to reach a high ground if you need. Not only that, but just to make sure that this cooldown isn't wasted just for doing that, I'm going to be reducing its cooldown from 8 to 6 seconds, and I'm going to be doing the same change that I did for Devo, where it reduces beam type damage by 20% when used. This is a laundry list of buffs so far, and I'm not quite done with them, but this one's a bit sillier. If you land on a player with Fortify, you'll now deal 100 damage and gain 50 over health. I don't know how viable this will actually be, but dear God, if I could make Divorisa a thing using basically Wrecking Ball's pile driver, I think that'd be fucking hilarious, and I will do it every day of the week. However, because these buffs are kind of massive, I do need some massive nerfs to compensate. The smallest of the three, Fortify's damage reduction is going down from 45 to 40%, and then the duration is going from 4 seconds to 2.5. So you really have to make sure you are getting the most out of Fortify whenever you pop it. And finally, the biggest nerf to Orisa is reinstating her damage fall off. Up to 75% damage reduced, 15 to 25 meters, slightly longer than Diva currently is. This nerf genuinely is massive. I can't overstate how much of a buff it was when Orisa got her damage fall off removed. That was what catapulted her into the top of the meta. This being nerfed down again to existence immediately offsets most of the buffs on its own. And in fact, she might need an even bigger buff. For example, Fortify's cooldown might need to drop from 14 to 12 seconds, just to make it even somewhat comparable to the power level she has now. But again, I'm not trying to keep those power levels the same, I'm trying to nerf these tanks. Next up, Ramatra. I don't like the current patch of Ramatra and what they did to him.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
I think that the Nemesis form cooldown reduction is great, but it doesn't quite solve the problem with Ramatra, which is the moment he presses right mouse button in Nemesis form, he is basically unkillable. He is the tankiest character in the game, and he can just slowly back away from you while taking 0 damage from anything you do. Oh my god! So I'm dropping the block move speed penalty from 50 to 30%, which puts it more in line with current Orisa. I'm reducing the cooldown on his shield from 13 to 12 seconds, just to make it so that then his cooldown rotation isn't as painful. And I'm increasing his base armor back up to 100, which it was before the hotfix, which puts his base health before Nemesis form back up to 500 from 475. Not the biggest buffs, mostly the block one is the big deal, so block's damage resistance is going to drop from 75% to 60%. This might sound like it's not a big deal, but a damage source that would originally do 100 damage, currently shot into Ramatra block, does 25. Do that 10 times, you're doing 250 damage. Meanwhile, with this nerf, shoot a 100 damage projectile 10 times at him, he's losing 400 health. You're almost doubling your damage against Ramatra with this change. For every 100 damage you do, you're gaining 15. And just to make it so he's a little bit less survivable even more, I'm reducing his Nemesis form armor from 300 to 250. Again, I think the main problem with Ramatra is his survivability during Nemesis form's block in particular, but the punchies should be able to be a little bit buffed from what it used to be, so if this is too much of a nerf, you could probably bring that back up to 275. For Reinhardt, there's already kind of a good baseline for what changes he kind of needs right now, in particular, the content creator game mode and what Emong had for the character. Now, if you aren't aware, the lower his shield is, the faster he moves. Landing a Fire Strike increases movement speed again, and Charge gives a 50% damage resistance. Now, I'm not saying to do all of this, because this is kind of ridiculous, but it's a good starting point for where I think he can be. First things first, the lower his shield health is, the faster he moves with it up. That way then he can't just break his shield and start running at you at Mach 5, especially after landing a Fire Strike. But the lower his shield health is, the faster he can move with it up. Even at lower shield health, he will move faster than he currently does without the shield up. So you can walk up to people, approach them with the shield. Once it takes enough damage, keep approaching with the shield up, and then as long as you don't manage to break it, which is a skill check, you will be able to smash people's faces in because you've already approached. The next change he had is if you hit somebody with Fire Strike, you gain 30% move speed for 2 seconds. I would make this a little less polarizing, getting a 15% speed boost for 3 seconds. That way then you're still moving quick, but you're not moving quick for a short burst of time, if that makes sense. It can feel very jarring to have your movement speed increase and then decrease rapidly. For example, TF2's The Hot Hand. And the final change Emong did, which I'm pulling back significantly, is Reinhardt's charge damage resist, which he has at 50%. I would bring it down to 20%. That way then Reinhardt still is able to charge and take less damage, but he's not invincible during his charge. 700 HP with a 50% damage resistance and a lot of armor is ridiculous. We say that on Mauga already. Next, this will make sense later with another change. I'm going to increase his health from 400 to 425. But his survivability is taking a hit outside of that. Specifically, his shield is dropping from 1600 down to 1350, again lower than it was last patch. Additionally, his armor is going to drop from 300 to 250. That way then his overall survivability is lower. That's why I gave him the health increase, just to make it a little bit more fair. His survivability will overall decrease, but his engage potential will increase without a Lucio. So lower ranked players should find him a little bit more manageable, I hope. This next one may be a little bit overcooked, but this is how I would want the character to be changed. Roadhog is boring. Roadhog is not fun. The only fun part about Roadhog is hooking squishies because it feels rewarding to land that shot. However, landing a one shot on an enemy player is boring for the enemy player. So rather than leaning towards having a weird, sort of gimmicky one-shot combo with Pigpen, here's my suggestion. First things first, get rid of the current primary fire. It's not as bad as I thought it was. It is a little bit more interesting than I originally gave it credit for, but the old secondary fire is just way more interesting. It would definitely be more gimmicky, but at the very least, I think that it's fair. And again, based on what Paladins does, it has been tested. This is true. Having the hook character have a weak close range tool, but a better poke tool, is actually quite significant. And on the note of poke tool, you could probably adjust the damage fall off and spread as well to make it a little bit stronger at that middle range. Next, as for straight buffs, instead of a side grade, take a breather. This ability is a bit controversial lately because of how much it makes this character so difficult to kill, man. Here's what I offer to change. It's not the best change. It's something that people, again, talked about back in like 2016, 2017, but hear me out. Using Take a Breather reduces the debuff duration of anything applied to you for half a second for every 1 second you use it. If you're antied, which lasts 3 seconds, wait 2 seconds, start using Take a Breather, you only have half a second left. This change should make it so that then Roadhog isn't as crippled by things such as the aforementioned Bionade, significantly hindered by slows, and the like. It simply makes Roadhog a little bit stronger at dealing with crowd control and dealing with debuffs. In an ideal world, I would say to replace Pigpen with something else that does this job a little bit better, but we're not in an ideal world, and quite frankly, I don't have a good solution as to what this could be. For example, adding a shield to this scrapyard character doesn't make sense. Adding a cleanse to this character would probably be a little overpowered if it's just a pure cleanse. Counterplay added to Roadhog is a fickle thing to balance both the lore and the gameplay functionality. Additionally, I'm going to increase the radius of Pigpen from 4 to 5 meters and the detection radius from 2.5 to 3 meters, because right now it will probably be a terrible cooldown without the combo. My final changes are a couple of nerfs. Specifically, Pigpen's initial damage will be reduced from 60 to 50, still having the same damage over time, and Take a Breather's healing will be cut down from 160 per second to 150 per second. Not huge, but a bit of a nerf. I don't actually think Roadhog is strong enough to where I think he needs significant nerfs, so I think these should suffice. If he's a little bit more fun to play against because he's not one-shotting you or he's not busting up your tank, I think that it's okay for him to be a little bit stronger. Right now, he's still kind of garbage, but okay and ranked. Next is a change that I've had in my back pocket for a long time, and this was actually in the original Monster patch, and they still haven't done it, and it fucking boggles the mind. So what I'm gonna do is increase the Hypersphere direct damage from 25 to 30, whilst reducing the splash damage from 30 to 9 to 25 to 8. This will make it so that then landing direct is equally rewarding as it is now, but splash damage, aka his anti-brawl ability, is significantly worse. He's not able to just get into people's faces and deal 50 damage to everyone in a short range. Instead, he's going to be doing like 40. So it's a small nerf, but it's a nerf. More significantly, Sigma's brawl capabilities have been way too strong for too long, and the simple way to change that is to nerf his HP. He should not be a good brawling tank, but right now he's one of the best at high levels. So reducing his shield health specifically, because shield health is really strong right now with the ability to regen as a tank without waiting 5 seconds. From 275 to 225 reduces his ability to just sit there, take 1 billion damage, and walk away without a threat. And it's not about how much easier it will be for him to be killed. A lot of the clips I have playing Sigma, I'm not left at 50 HP, but at the same time, it's not about what will get you killed, it's about what will make you killable. You can trade a Sigma who's at 150 health, but it gets a lot harder at 200. So the mindset of playing against a Sigma and what you're able to get away with against a Sigma and as a Sigma will be shifted greatly. Another change that I think Emon kind of got right is Winston. Winston is a little bit too good with bubble, and that's what most people have to complain about him, if anything, and it is admittedly quite annoying as a support, but it is still very skillful. So as much as I'd love to not change Winston and just leave him as is and tell supports to suck it up, it probably needs a nerf for the health of the role. Specifically, I think increasing the bubble size by 50% from 5 to 7.5 meter radius makes it so that it's a little bit easier to play inside and to decide when to leave or when to be in it, and a little bit harder for the enemy Winston to get good value out of because he's not able to sit in the center of his bubble and zap people on the outside of it anymore. He has to actually position really, really well to get value out of the bubble. Obviously, I'm thinking specifically of Ana and Brig. Brig will have an easier time whipping him because she won't always be blocked by that bubble, and Ana will have an easier time mating and sleeping him, and they will both have an easier time healing each other from inside of that bubble. However, it will still be better at covering things like chokes, so I don't think this is a direct nerf. It will be better at protection, a little bit worse at those hard engages. So better for bad players, worse for good players. As straight buffs and nerfs, increasing the bubble HP from 650 to 700, so then it is a little bit better at covering those chokes and covering defensive play. You can even drop it on the enemy team to protect your backline a little bit easier, especially with that increased range. But also the duration is going down from 5 to 4 seconds. If you don't have good focus fire to blow up the bubble, it's not as huge of a deal because it will not be lasting as long. Again, I wish I didn't have to nerf Winston, but if there's anything to nerf, it's what people don't find fun against him. Which again is the ultimate goal. Any character should be fun to play against, any character should be fun to play, and any character should be fun to play with. I have possibly overcooked these Wrecking Ball changes. It might be a little bit too strong, but let's see, because he's kind of struggled in Overwatch 2 the whole time. Every time somebody thinks, hey, maybe he's viable, he ends up not viable. And I only have a singular buff that's doing this. And specifically that buff is that CC can no longer affect his roll form. Not saying that he will be immune to CC in his roll form, but he can shift to and from ball and crab mode at will no matter what he's affected by. If he's stunned, he can shift. If he's hacked, he can shift. If he's hindered, he can shift. If he's in grab, he can shift. This is mostly a buff so that then he can move away from these things quicker and so that then he can hide his crit box a little bit better, because right now the biggest problem with Ball is that if you can't crowd control him, he's invincible. If you can crowd control him, he's a free kill. This should reduce that a little bit. As for nerfs to compensate, I think that we could start off with reducing his roll damage back down to 50, as well as reducing his Mind's HP from 60 to 40. It's a small breakpoint, but if you are In the minefield, before they activate, you can melee around you to clear the ones close to you, which at least gives you a slightly better chance at survival, as well as Doomfist Slam now killing all the mines again, as well as Winston being able to clear them a little bit faster. It's not the biggest nerf ever, but it makes playing against the ball just a little bit more bearable. Now again, I overcooked that buff a little bit too hard, so we can also throw in a removal of his shield health if we really need to. He would be very, very survivable, and we could even reduce his armor by 25 on top of that, which would put him at 600 overall health, which was actually where he was in Overwatch 1. So we can absolutely make him a little bit less tanky, but a little bit funner. However, those HP changes I am not attached to by any means. It's something that we can do, but don't need to. Finally, for the tanks, this is one that I disagree with the hotfix, and I saw a meme of somebody saying, leave it to Blizzard to buff a character to be overpowered and then nerf them to be weaker than they were before the buff. So, let's change that a little bit. We're bringing back the bubble cooldown from 11 to 10 seconds. That's a no-brainer. But we're leaving the duration of bubbles from 2.5 seconds to 2.25 seconds. That way then, it's still a good bubble. It's not as strong as it was pre-hotfix, but it's still stronger than it was pre-patch. However, there has got to be some other changes here, because once the Zarya gets rolling, it's hard to stop her from rolling you. First things first, her minimum damage is going to increase from 95 to 100 DPS. This breakpoint was mostly so that a zero charge Zarya couldn't kill you in 2 seconds flat. I think it was more so just for vanity than anything else. To remove some of the polarization, this is a good place to start, as well as reducing her maximum damage from 190 to 180. Again, it's super hard to stop a Zarya once she's gotten her momentum, but if she doesn't have her momentum, she's kind of useless. This will help curb those extremes just a little bit. And finally, because I do think she needs a little bit of a nerf tacked on top of this, the maximum energy per bubble is going to be reduced from 45 to 40, with the actual health of the bubble not changing. So the effect of damage on her bubbles isn't as high as it used to be, but if you fully shatter a bubble, it will still give 40 energy. Given the fact that the HP on the bubbles is already higher anyways, I don't think this is a huge deal. I think this is a fair nerf. It's been too easy for Zarya to reach and stay at maximum charge for a while now. Oh yeah. Nerf Baptiste damage by 1, and nerf Kiriko Suzu healing from 80 to 110 to 40 to 55. Alright, thanks.
Bye!